Libby Squire was just steps from her front door, returning home after a night out with friends when she vanished. The 21-year-old's disappearance from her own lawn sent shivers through an area already on edge from a string of crimes against women. It was feared Libby had become another victim, and tragically, those fears were proven correct. Welcome to True Crime Diaries. If you love classic true crime, you've come to the right place. Be sure to hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with all my future videos. It's 100% free. Liberty Ann Squire, known as Libby, was born on January 1, 1998, in Buckinghamshire. She was the eldest of 4 and had an amazing relationship with her parents, Lisa and Russell. Libby was defined as fun-loving but struggled greatly in high school, battling anxiety, depression, and body image issues, including an eating disorder. Despite these challenges, she persevered, got her life back on track, and pursued philosophy at the University of Hull. University became a turning point for Libby. She blossomed, becoming more confident and happy, embracing her independence. She was also in a 3-year relationship with her boyfriend, Connor, who considered her the one. Libby was thriving, studying, exploring, discovering her personality, and, like many college students, enjoying parties. This was exactly what she was doing on January 31, 2019. It was bitterly cold in Hull, almost a month after her 21st birthday, when Libby planned a night out with friends. She joined them for drinks and dancing in central Hull, dressed in a black skirt and matching jacket. Before leaving, she sent a quick "good night" text to Connor and left her phone at home. Connor couldn't have known this text would mark the beginning of an enduring mystery. The fun started around 9 p.m. The group had drinks and chatted for a long time before heading to the Welly, a nightclub in central Hull. However, Libby was denied entry. Door security at the Welly was instructed not to admit overly inebriated people, and Libby had drunk too much before arriving. Frustrated but with no choice, she decided to go home. Her friends hailed a cab and told the driver her address, then returned to the club instead of ensuring their drunk and confused friend got home safely. This decision would later become a deep regret. A highly intoxicated Libby was in a taxi with a stranger, which sounds concerning, but the taxi driver was a gentleman. He dropped Libby off right in front of her doorstep on Wellesley Avenue at about 11:30 p.m. Her friends had already paid, so Libby stumbled out, and the driver drove off. All Libby had to do was take a few steps from the pavement to her front door, but she didn't. In a drunken stupor, she made a U-turn and continued walking down the street, truly unaware of her surroundings. Alone and abandoned by her friends, Libby also dropped her house keys in front of the house, which her friends would later find. Libby was seen on surveillance cameras walking, or rather staggering and struggling to stay upright, half a mile away from home on Beverly Road at around 11:40 p.m. Many witnesses saw her. Some remembered seeing a drunken Libby sobbing and crying in the street, even falling at one point and struggling to get up. As far as we know, no one truly stopped to help her, though 2 good Samaritans eventually stepped in. They recalled Libby being agitated and angry, refusing any help, so they could only help her sit on a nearby bench and leave her there. Meanwhile, Libby's friends at the club realized something was wrong. A lot of time had passed, and Libby hadn't texted to say she was home. They knew she was drunk, but she always messaged them. Now, they worried. They tried calling her phone, but as you remember, Libby had left it at home. She wasn't home by this point, but her friends didn't know that yet, which is why all calls went unanswered. Libby's friends immediately left the club and rushed to her home, incessantly knocking on the door and calling out to her. But Libby answered neither her door nor her phone. That's when one of her friends found the keys in the snow outside her house. Their fears deepened. Libby wouldn't just drop her keys unless something bad had happened. Libby's friends wasted no time getting her parents and investigators involved. At 21 years old, Libby Squire was reported missing. Luckily, investigators didn't give Libby's family or friends the typical, wait 24 to 48 hours, speech. They began the investigation immediately. Something was amiss. Detectives initially thought she might have run away after a breakdown that night, but they couldn't be certain. While Libby had struggled with mental health issues before, her parents and friends claimed she was very happy and had plans involving travel and journalism. She showed no signs of internal struggle. So, investigators looked for other answers. The search for Libby was massive, the largest missing persons search in the Humber Police's history. Over 100 police officers actively searched for Libby, looking far and wide in remote areas, abandoned properties, hospitals, rivers, and even drainage systems. Every possible location had to be cleared. Libby's parents made countless public appeals, pleading for information. Detectives were extremely worried, not just because she was missing, but because it was deathly cold, and they feared hypothermia, especially since she wasn't wearing much to keep warm. Police even described Libby's clothes publicly to jog people's memories. They received many tips, and their next step was checking CCTV cameras. Thankfully, there was an abundance of surveillance cameras across the city and near Libby's house. However, this also meant investigators spent a lot of time sifting through footage to find Libby and build a timeline of her movements. Humberside detectives spent weeks and months going through every single CCTV camera. Based on when the taxi driver dropped her off, investigators began reviewing cameras across the city of Kingston around 11:30 p.m. Not long after, they found Libby. She was seen walking on Beverly Road, clearly drunk, staggering on the pavement, sometimes falling and getting back up. Police also saw the two men helping her. But they saw something else too. Hours before Libby was last seen, a silver Vauxhall Astra was driving around the same area, not just once, but seemingly aimlessly in circles. Around midnight, detectives saw Libby standing by a bus stop, trying to keep herself steady. At that exact moment, they saw the same silver car pull up close to Libby. CCTV cameras further showed a man stepping out of the car and following Libby, first on the pavement across the road, then running across to join her. From the looks of it, Libby didn't seem to know this man, but they were talking. There was no push and pull, no fighting or resistance. All of this happened as Libby was walking back to the street that led to her house. A few minutes into the man talking with Libby, the two were seen walking away from the street where Libby's house was. This did not look good to the police. Investigators then looked at other surveillance cameras to get a close-up of Libby, the man, and his car. One camera caught Libby standing by the pavement where the silver car was, and the man in question was sitting in his car with the door open and his legs out. It seemed like they were still talking. Police also realized there were still cars on the street and assumed the mysterious man was waiting for them to leave before acting. A few minutes after midnight, at around 12:08 a.m., Libby got into the man's silver car. The man walked up to the driver's side, started his car, and drove away. Since the camera was positioned in a certain way, only part of the car was visible, so police didn't know how Libby actually got into the car. Seeing this, investigators decided to go to the exact area where the camera was. After some searching, they found something, Libby's watch. It was on the ground, discarded. This could only mean one thing, and it wasn't good. Libby was likely forced into that car. The mysterious man might have used physical force to drag her in, knocking the watch off her wrist in the process. Detectives also saw the car making its way to Oak Road playing fields around 12:11 a.m., a couple of minutes away from Beverly Road. What was chilling was that it was a wooded, remote, dark, and vast piece of land. Investigators finally had something: this man, his silver car, and where he was headed with Libby inside. But they still needed more information. So, they went to the Oak Road playing fields and questioned people about hearing or seeing anything out of the ordinary. Someone did come forward. A man who lived near that wooded area was woken from his sleep by a woman's screams at about 12:15 a.m., just a few minutes after the car had pulled into that area. When the witness checked outside his window, he saw a man sprinting towards a silver car. The locals felt dread sinking into their bones. Investigators now knew something terrible had happened to Libby. Finally, the last tip came in, and this was how investigators caught onto the mysterious man and finally knew who he was. On the same night, February 1st, at around 3 a.m., a little over 3 hours since the woman's screams were heard in Oak Road playing fields, two women were walking down a deserted Beverly Road when they saw a man on the side of the road. As they tried to figure out what to do, this despicable man traumatized them by flashing them. These women were extremely uncomfortable and hurried past him, but this monster was having the time of his life, flashing himself inappropriately in the middle of the street. When detectives noted the time, they went back to check their surveillance cameras, and sure enough, that creepy man was there. Investigators could clearly see his face and his car, and it was the same car that followed Libby around and that she was ultimately dragged into. After a couple of days, police hit another jackpot by getting a clearer view of the car's license plate. Finally, they had a name. The man in question was 24-year-old Polish native Pawel Reawich. So, who was this Pawel guy? He was born in Poland and moved to the UK in 2015. At the time of the case, Pawel worked as a butcher for Caro Food Group at a meat processing plant in Malton, North Yorkshire. He was married to a Polish woman named Jagoda, and they moved to the UK together. Pawel and his wife had 2 kids, and at the time of the case, his criminal record was clean as a slate. But that's not the entire truth. His crimes hadn't made it onto police record yet. Pawel, although described as a loving father and a cool guy to be around, was a creep, a pervert, and essentially a peeping Tom. He had really perverse urges when it came to intimacy and pleasure and would indulge in things like voyeurism and inappropriate displays. He would creep into people's windows and houses and spy on women, girls, and even couples, which is a whole new level of creepy if you ask me. Pawel also had sticky fingers. Aside from stealing usual valuables, he would steal women's undergarments, adult toys, and of course, money. This guy was a real piece of work. What was so infuriating was that he'd been doing all of this since 2017, not even 2 years into his big move from Poland to the UK. But he was never reprimanded or arrested for any of his crimes, even though women terrorized by Pawel reported the incidents, and fingerprints and DNA samples were taken. They didn't match anyone in the system, which emboldened Pawel. He was certain he would get away with his crimes, and that made him arrogant. It turned out that Pawel lived very close to Libby and had even committed many non-consensual sex crimes, like flashing himself in inappropriate displays, on Libby Street. So, even though Pawel never practiced his twisted, dark fantasies in personal life, as far as we know, he was still a predator and made women feel terrified and uncomfortable. This was why police decided to arrest him on suspicion of taking Libby's life. All the pieces fit. He had motive, means, opportunity, everything. Now it was time to question Pawel. Initially, he denied knowing Libby. But when shown the footage of him following Libby, Pawel, in true suspect fashion, changed his story. He told investigators he was trying to help Libby that night and that he left her alone after dropping her off at Oak Road playing fields, which was obviously a lie. While keeping Pawel in custody on suspicion of murder and more than 10 sexual offenses, detectives still searched everywhere for Libby. The case was taking a dark turn, and as much as anyone didn't want to admit it, Libby had likely been a target of Pawel that fateful night. It was almost 2 months into Libby's disappearance, on March 20, 2019, when a fisherman in the Humber Estuary found something. It looked like something floating in the water. When investigators arrived, they retrieved the mysterious object, and sadly, it was a human body. Around the neck was a necklace with the letter L on it. Forensic reports positively identified the body as that of 21-year-old Libby Squire. Since the body was in very bad shape, it was impossible to determine the cause of death. She could have drowned, she could have been disposed of after passing away, or something else, we won't ever know. But she was tragically taken advantage of, that much we do know. DNA taken from Libby's body was a match to Pawel, and now he couldn't deny what he had done to Libby anymore. Pawel's trial was held on January 12, 2021, and lasted about 5 weeks. The prosecution argued that Pawel was a dangerous predator with twisted urges and fantasies, and he was looking for a victim. Anyone who would satisfy his uncontrollable, disgusting urges. It's believed that Pawel saw Libby on the streets, drunk out of her mind and vulnerable, and preyed upon her. He then forced her into his car, and when no one was looking, he took her to the remote wooded area where he forced himself on her and eventually took her life with his bare hands. He then tossed Libby's body into the cold river Humber like trash and went home and enjoyed a steaming hot shower. One thing I'd like to point out here, though, is the timeline. If you remember, Libby was last seen on CCTV right around midnight, yet Pawel was caught exposing himself to those 3 women at about 3 a.m. Meaning these women were not just visually assaulted by this pervert, they came in disturbingly close contact with a murderer just hours after he'd claimed a young woman's life, and this revelation was haunting. Despite all this, the defense team argued that Pawel had nothing to do with Libby's murder and that he dropped her off at the playing fields, even though his DNA was all over and inside of Libby's body. Why they wasted their time on such a ridiculous defense is beyond me. But soon enough, the verdict was found. On February 11, 2021, Pawel Reawich was found guilty of the sexual assault and murder of Libby Squire and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 27 years. Pawel's wife divorced him shortly after and moved back to Poland with their kids. Following Libby's tragic passing and the way she was targeted by an evil and vile monster who had it out for women and treated them like disposable objects of pleasure, Libby's mom, Lisa, has advocated and raised her voice against crimes of indecent nature. Even though things like voyeurism and flashing are non-consensual sexual offenses, things can escalate pretty quickly, as they did in Libby's case. Not only this, but these incidents are incredibly scarring. It doesn't matter if you touch someone or not, the mental damage can follow someone for the rest of their life. The purpose of Lisa's campaign is to take these crimes and the offenders seriously, give them harsh sentences before they can ruin more lives or, worse, take them. Lisa and Russell's hearts died after Libby's passing, and they don't want any other woman or anyone for that matter to go through this ever again. Lisa has even raised her voice against high-profile murderers like Wayne Couzens, who was a serving Metropolitan Police officer and a Stage 10 creep, predator, and serial assaulter who took advantage of and murdered Sarah Everard in March of 2021, a woman who, just like Libby, was just minding her own business and walking down a quiet London road to her home. Violent crimes against women keep escalating to newer extremes as time goes on. This needs to stop. Libby didn't deserve what happened to her when all she was doing was going back home after a night out. No one deserves what this woman went through. The only saving grace in the situation is that for Libby, her pain, her suffering, her anguish, everything that she went through that evening, is now finally over. But now her family is the one who has to bear the burden of this grief, this resentment, and the undying hatred for a man who took an innocent woman's life and the decades that she had left to spend with her loved ones, all for a few minutes or likely seconds of brief satisfaction. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Diaries. I want to give a special thank you for being a member. Also, if you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video or find a link down in the description. You can check out other interesting cases we have covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free.